So just to start, Golden Iron is a book written in 1970 by a historian named Fritz. So I tend to, prefer to dive deep into the historical archives, maybe things that analysts and industry and capital markets maybe have forgotten or never read in the first place to understand history, the narratives, economic progress, changes in power structure, et cetera, that may have been gathering dust on the library bookshelves in the archives. I always enjoy this exercise. So, how did I find this, Cameron, in the first place? So noticeably, right, we've talked about Social Security, the entitlement, cost structure in the U.S. Treasuries kind of budget and how that plays into the federal debt and deficit situation. And one of the questions I asked, just diving deep on my AI models, was, all right, so I know the first state-sponsored like old age pension was actually Otto von Bismarck's Germany, coming out of like a unified German state led by Prussia or Berlin at the center under the monarchy, right, who Bismarck reported into and served on behalf of. And I wondered, okay, when did that state pension actually like collapse and become uneconomic? And the answer, I got was kind of interesting. It was, well, it didn't formally collapse like you would think it would, like say in the U.S. Like there's a long-term trend where a lot of corporate pensions have gone bankrupt and had to been absorbed ultimately into a federal or state backstop, right? That's a topic for maybe another day, another episode. Um, but it was actually the World War One loss and Weimar hyperinflation that just eroded Bismarck's pension system. So I got through like, how did this thing happen? Why was it implemented in the first place? And that led to this book, Golden Iron, right? And to me, the story of why is always what you want to get down to. Ask the Toyota 5 Whys methodology. Cameron, I know you like to
Oh yeah.
process things in that framework. Just keep asking why, and you get down to how things happened, and then you can actually make sense of the world and understand it as it is, as opposed to the chaos and disorder that comes with the narratives if you're just trying to make sense of the world through news headlines alone. All right. So the reason I like this book about Bismarck and how he was able to form and structure this unified German state is because it focuses on the process of building it out, but not just from like a military or political angle, specifically focuses on finance as like the key pillar of accomplishing or ultimately what amounts to winning at the geopolitical poker table against your opponents, right? So gold and iron is really a play on the two key resource inputs that were utilized by the key players, Bismarck, and then secondary, and this is a figure who's been forgotten by history, was his banker, this character Gerson Bleichroder, who has been forgotten by history, essentially just erased, and that comes down to his largely due to his Jewish roots, also German citizen. He ascended to nobility. He got the titles. You got the von, by his name. All of that stuff that puts you in the elite class of society. But obviously, we know what happened with Germans and anti-Semitism in the course of the 20th century. We won't cover that ground here, but his reputation has basically been washed away because of how things kind of played out
Right.
on that front. But slowly, like we'll build this back up and recover how this actually got there. I bring this to today's situation. So we're in the middle of like we're unifying towards something as an old world transforms into a new. I think everybody's clear on that. We're talking about it every week on Mindprint Hash. There's clearly a previous industrial or an economic paradigm governance paradigm, financial paradigm, you name it, like coming out of the post-World War II order. Since 2008, we've been in that transition into the new world. And basically, Cameron and I are talking about it every week in terms of like real-time color commentary, as far as, just playing it out on how this is emerging. Bismarck was doing like navigating the same situation in the second half of the 1800s in continental Europe, specifically this big power upheaval, economic upheaval, all of that as the two primary waves of industrialization. And then from a political standpoint, you could say the egalitarianism movement that broadened and was sweeping the continent. You could say like UK as well, the US, same thing. Um, Basically, like the way I think about that, we were transitioning from a feudal era where, there were the noble, classes, the legacy, institutional wealthy, all of that, who are responsible for basically managing society, keeping everything on the rails. And then there's the middle, not really a large middle, but mainly a lower classes where under the feudal era you had basically serfs. Um, and in this transition that Bismarck navigated, those serfs, as spread the egalitarianism movement, the lower and middle classes transition into like a citizen role or an industrial worker type of role, which was just like a huge social upheaval.
Right.
And we're going through something very similar today. When you're in the eye of the hurricane, though, you don't know how it plays out. So, reading this and how the power factions kind of line up against each other, and then you had like what would be considered an A plus go first ballot Hall of Fame talent at like this game, at playing the poker game at the upper like the highest levels, to read about how Bismarck did this and incorporated finance. And he wasn't a financier, he wasn't a central banker, but this Bleichroder character was his version of that. So it goes through this whole, I mean, it's 700 pages. It's a deep cut, but it tells you exactly how they transition, like they navigated like their hand. They played the hand for the Prussian monarchy and ultimately worked through the other side, victorious in establishing a new order. So we'll go deeper on that. Maybe we'll record a separate like book review episode, but I don't think anybody
Yeah.
wants like today wants me to go 60 to 90 minutes on that. But I'll just stick to a couple of highlights that capture like it fits really well to the era we're in today. So number one, Bismarck, coming from the conservative class, um, he came from the like nobility. He was part of the landed, like the feudal elite, um, and he was the prime minister running the government on behalf of the monarchy, King William, right? And they were fighting for survival at this point, and their opposition was, this isn't new or original. We call them the same thing today, the liberal wing, which was really the emergent kind of class of society that were becoming the nouveau riche, um, industrialists, bankers, lawyers. I mean, maybe like medicine, like a new money that was growing on this paradigm, who were then competing with the old elite. But then also, very oddly, they want to integrate them. They want to be at the same social strata of society. They want that acceptance, all the above, but they're competing against each other. And then you have everyone, right? The workers, et cetera, and they're being pulled in different directions here. And when your society is going through this process, like all things are possible, like deck cards thrown up in the air, and you basically have to have competent management. Otherwise, this can go very badly, right? We can go through other examples of societies that like just fall flat on their faces here. But the key thing you have to have is competence at the helm and like leaders with a vision to map into to get society to, you know, take one end of the trapeze and jump to the other, and like the Barnum and Bailey circus kind of analogy. Just they got to have something. They got to see that next trapeze bar and then be physically capable of grabbing onto it and taking society along with them for the ride. So this walkthrough of the experience of Bismarck showed a scenario of how that happened. Now, key thing, like when I was reading this, you can literally see it mapping very closely. Like I could go through the narrative and map onto it in our own post 2008 um, storytelling of the players and developments involved. But I think the key one, um, Bismarck, going after the vision of how do we, get through this thing as a society without face planting and falling flat on our face. Um, he um, like utilized like financial tools, uh, political maneuvers, all the above. But ultimately, once everybody's finances are pressed and stretched to the seams, it hit a point like roughly it was like by 1863 1864 with this conflict in Schleswig and Holstein, just provinces that were at the northwest of present day Germany. um, they went from like the Danish crown and were challenged and ultimately absorbed into this unified German empire that was coming into existence via war. um, it had its like it felt eerily similar to what we're going through in 2026 with Venezuela, Iran, and we could just go through the list of like Cuba's what's next, Greenland, like nobody knows. They're just waiting for our modern day Bismarck, which is, the Trump 47th administration, and, and my telling of the story. Um, it was that same process. And going into 1864, Bismarck had like he was controversial. He didn't have um, like majority approval ratings, any of that. He was an unpopular figure. The country wasn't behind him. They were anti-war, um, anti-Bismarck. And then once this starts happening in 1864, the military, like the war won in Schleswig-Holstein, um, and in that process, he convinced the Austrian Empire to join with the Prussian Empire and just totally dismantle this tiny little two-province state in a matter of days. Same thing we saw, like quick wins, Venezuela, or like Iran's a longer situation. But from a military standpoint, it was, in my opinion, pretty clear pretty quickly how this was going. But he flips that win. Within 2 years, he's gotten Austria to declare war on Prussia. Prussia just cleans the clocks within like a few days as well, and you suddenly got this German unified state that took centuries to put together. It just happens
It
gradually, then
appears.
suddenly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so the public support behind Bismarck and this vision he was building towards, and in the poker game, it was like he there were several moments where like he could have been forced into a resignation. He could have lost several points along the way, but within a span of like 2 to 3 years, 1864 to 1866, suddenly he exits with like, or like he amasses the giant chip stack at the poker table, and then it's just game on. The whole society is
Right.
behind him. And then it goes to its end game with the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, which did not go well for France. And at that point, it was game, set, and match. So, analogy today, you've got the same amount, I think, of public confusion. Well, start with you've got the polarization, right? The same situation that the state was in, the Prussian state, the German peoples were in prior to 1864. I think that's crystal clear here in the domestic situation in the U.S. Um, but now that it's gone to the mats in the situation, like it's gone military, Venezuela, Iran, etc., and it has been for a while, but it's very clear right now. The U.S. government is executive branch and military, and they are facing an adversarial Congress out of. When I say that, I mean like both parties. If you add them up, now that doesn't mean the president and this administration don't have supporters in Congress and the Senate, but they do not have a majority that supports the executive branch and the military. Is how I would characterize
Agreed.
the situation on the ground
Yeah.
as it stands today. All right. So, key thing here, winning begets winning. I think our colleague Dave, when I was running him through my read on this book, he was like, "That makes sense if you think about this in terms of a sports analogy." They said like, "Wow, this team has such great chemistry. The stadium's full. They're winning. Like everything's great. How did like is it just the players? Do they love getting along with each other?" It's like, no. The secret ingredient is winning. Like the stadiums are full,
Yep.
the fans are cheering, they're singing together because they've won 20 games in a row or they won the Super Bowl, right? Like this is just obvious. So I think where we look at this thing today, the Iran situation, um, it is in like who knows what inning we're in, but we're past the fifth or sixth at this stage, I would think. Um, it's starting to come together. We're looking for the closeout, right? It's not over yet, but we've got either the setup guy or the closer, on the mound at this point, trying to wrap this up. But my point here, everybody's worried about midterms, country's anti-war, everybody's confused about what's going on. Take a page from like this thing can change very quickly, and I think this whole order, what we're marching to, like you have to have visionary leadership who is playing this geopolitical poker game towards some end.